Hey everyone. So welcome to our content session. So we were trying to get our YouTube live stream up and running, and just like last week, it's giving us a few issues. However, we are recording this session, and I'm going to send out a recording probably tomorrow to everyone who signed up to attend. So that will go out. But like Josh was saying, there are some previous sessions on our YouTube channel. There's a whole list of the sessions that we were doing last fall, so you can check them out there. So thanks for joining us today. It's our second kind of session after the holidays. We were a bit late kicking it off. Today we're going to talk about content best practices and really just the best ways to, set up your sequences in terms of steps. So whether you want to be using all emails or whether you're going to be using, maybe some LinkedIn semi-automation there, but really how to optimize your sequences in terms of configuration and content, really just to get the most out of those sequences, increase those open rates, increase those reply rates. So Josh and I have found that these sessions seem to be the ones that most people want to join, and they have lots of questions. So like all of our sessions, feel free, drop questions into the Q&A or drop them into the chat. We'll be keeping an eye on them as we go, and we'll try to get to all of those questions. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Josh. So Josh works on the client success team here at Reply. He is also our content specialist. So Josh, take it away.
Thank you very much. I will share my screen here. Sorry, let me get back to that. Can you guys, nope, that's not it.
We're a bit rusty because we haven't done this since last fall.
This one. Here we
Yay.
go. Perfect. Okay, so I have created a kind of stock sequence for you guys today. I will be going step by step through each of the individual kind of options here. If you guys have any questions along the way, feel free to reach out, and I will do what I can to answer. But to kind of dive in, I usually recommend starting with a 5-step structure, specifically referring to emails. You can kind of throw in third-party step types, things like LinkedIn. You can also throw in calls. Primarily, though, we do want to focus on the messaging you want to get across, how to maintain a conversational style, and what people are looking to respond to at certain points. To begin with, though, I will throw out the idea of introducing your sequences with something like a LinkedIn step. Currently, we have, it's largely manual based, but we are in active beta testing for full automation. So in the very near future, it should be much simpler to actually get these out. But the idea behind this is, from an outsider's perspective, LinkedIn is primarily manual based. Everything that you do on that platform is done by somebody sitting at their computer sending something out. If you were to start off with something like simply viewing a profile, any touch point immediately after that or surrounding that is going to seem just as manual as that initial touch point. So it's going to increase early on engagement by getting a little bit of extra name recognition or a little bit of facial recognition if they actually see your head pop up on their profile. So all you need to do is just send them a connection request, simply click on their LinkedIn, and that will do wonders for getting people to engage with you right out the gate. To that same point, your first step should be within a day or two of sending that initial profile request out. And you want to draw on that context. You want to say something along the lines of, hey, came across your profile on LinkedIn, thought we'd be a great match. I am blah, 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 blah. Dive into your sales pitch from there. It's all about trying to make the message sound as genuine as possible and as manual as possible. There are a lot of tells, and there are a lot of different systems out there that will send automated emails. So you want to try and differentiate by making this sound like you sat down, typed it up this morning, and sent it out yourself. The other goals of your first step are essentially to not get blocked or deleted out the gate. All I want to do with my first step is introduce who I am, and I want to maybe draw some attention to pain points or obstacles that I know my product, service, whatever the case is, that I can help with. A lot of the traps that I find a lot of clients fall into, especially early on, is when we ask people to implement questions into their content, they settle for simply saying, do you want to hop on a phone call? Or are you still interested? Let me know. And that's not really trying to promote engagement. If they don't want to hop on a phone call, they'll simply ignore you. Whereas asking specific questions that pertain to actual issues, if they don't respond to you, they're at least thinking on a certain level about ways that they can improve. And then because you brought it up, you're the first person that they're going to potentially reach out to. This also gives you ample room to expand upon the questions in follow-up steps. So instead of just saying, hey, I sent you an email a couple of days ago, do you want to hop on a phone call? You now have the opportunity to build and expand with different use cases, different examples, specific details about what you're going to do, how you're going to assist, versus just the fact that you can do something for them.
Yeah, and I
so
think,
kind of in a nutshell.
Yeah, I'm sorry,
Stephanie?
Josh, just jumping in here. I think I really love that approach. And the reason that I love it is because, you know, a lot of times, especially when you're doing cold outreach, the people that you're reaching out to, they don't know you. So like, you know, they've never had a conversation with you before. They don't know who you are. So if you're jumping in and that first piece of communication that you have with them is, you know, trying to sell them something, you're probably not going to get a lot of either replies to that. They may just ignore the email because people are looking at it going, who's this person? You know, if you open with some questions, you know, it does open a space for some dialogue. And then based on that dialogue that you have, then you can further tailor that approach with that specific prospect.
Yeah, exactly. You want to make it as unique at every point of the conversation. If you even have the time to make custom edits in the preview tab, obviously this is going to be lower scale as far as contexts are concerned. Any little bit of information is going to help increase short-term and long-term interactions. But kind to summarize what step one is all about, you want to start with a context opener, you want to keep it short and sweet, and you want to include questions that pertain to specific issues. So introduction and specifics. As far as subject lines go, I guess this is also pretty relevant. You do want to keep them short and sweet as well. There are a lot of tried and true subject lines you can kind of fall back on. Things like quick question. Those will work, and it's kind of undeniable that the open rates are pretty solid, but I think that has more to do with your lead sources. That is going to be huge when it comes to how your contacts engage. If you're using old, outdated lists, obviously you're not going to get the interactions that you're expecting, but anybody who is viable may fall for the curiosity trap. I personally like implementing their first name into the subject line. That way you're dedicating the message specifically to the individual, as opposed to just using a blanket statement that kind of sounds salesy. The example I like to use is if I were to go to my mailbox right now and there's a letter to Josh versus to homeowner, I'm going to be far more interested in the to Josh email versus the homeowner one, just because my name's on it. And I like to think most people act that way.
I throw out the mail that says to homeowner, by the way.
You throw it out?
I just throw it out. I don't even open it.
Yeah, most of the time.
Yeah.
I don't even own this home. So step two, I mentioned it briefly, but this is where you want to expand specifically on the how. A lot of people get hung up on the what they can do for other people, when that's not necessarily the most important thing. Anybody can write whatever they want in their messages. They can say they are the absolute best at what they do, But if you have no way of actually proving that you've done this before, that you have other clients that are satisfied, it's just words. So you want to do the equivalent of giving them a free sample here. You want to talk about specifically how you've worked with other people, what you did to get them specific results. And the more detailed and specific the use case, the better. Ideally, you can run multiple variants of this, or you can even segment your sequences or your lists based on use case, and then have a slightly different version of this step 2 for each of those different segments, giving them a more specific example of what makes sense for them versus just using a very generalized idea. But you really want to lean into kind of how you're going to help. You're conveying confidence, you're showing expertise. You have done this before, and the people you're reaching out to would be lucky to be able to work with you in the future. So that's really where you want to spend the most time here. It can be as short and sweet as you'd like. I'd recommend going a little bit longer as far as word count than your step 1, just because you don't want to kind of short yourself as far as what information you can provide. So take a little bit more time, dive into some specifics. You want to get into the meat of things and give them that information. This is a pretty good opportunity to also include links or attachments. I would recommend links over attachments if you had to choose one or the other. But if you are going to be implementing those types of strategies, you want to go into what they can expect when they click on this item. Don't just say, I've worked with so-and-so in the past. Here's a link to their profile to get more information. It's a little bit baity, and I still don't really know what I'm going to be interacting with if I just see that link. So you want to walk people through what they can expect. Give them a little bit of information, what's already in there. But don't give away all of your secrets. You want to kind of sweeten the deal, entice them, but hold a few things back. But you do want to be a little bit transparent in order to increase that engagement. Nobody wants to click on things blind. There's an inherent kind of negativity around attachments, especially from strangers. So do keep all of those things in mind. If you would not click on the link that you're sending based on the context that you provided, nobody else will. So remember, these are strangers. For the third email step, this is where you want to go into detail about kind of frequently asked questions and perceived bonuses. You have all been on calls about your product or service in the past. You know what your product or service is good for. You know what prospects are going to be asking on these calls. You want to get ahead of the conversation and start talking about these things before they even come up. It shows them, again, expertise. You've been doing this for a while. You're the type of person who they want to work with. You're giving them the information up front, so you're saving both of your parties time. As far as the perceived bonuses is concerned, that is going to be anything that sounds like it's kind of extra. Using Reply as the general template, we not only sell the tool itself, but we have our client success team and our live chat. These are all bonuses that people can look forward to upon their subscription. Whether we offer these services for literally everybody or we kind of hold them back to certain tiers is irrelevant. Implementing these things and mentioning them here makes it sound like they're getting a better deal than maybe they are. So obviously that example may not be a perfect fit for everybody on the call today, but anything that you can figure out that may be used as a perceived bonus, it could be a discount or something like that, maybe a free trial, throw that in here, and it's always going to help people want to engage a little bit more. This is another good part to implement some of those links or attachments. If you do have a link to pricing pages and things like that, testimony pages or videos, you always want to save those types of content for follow-up steps. The reason being, your first step is going to be the only one with its own subject line. That is essentially your key to the kingdom. Wherever that message lands is where all of these follow-up steps are going to follow suit. So you want to keep your first step as clean as possible to ensure it lands in the primary inbox folder versus any sort of supplementary options like promotions, updates, spam, things like that. Throwing in too many links or attachments early on can reduce the number of eyeballs you're going to see at a later stage. So holding off on that for a step 2 or a step 3 is a good way to ensure emails are landing in the proper location, and then you're still getting the interaction later on. While all of this is going on, I've added a call step on the end here. This is more just to discuss where I like to implement calls. I never want to randomly throw in a call step at an arbitrary point. I've found that, for example, I just stick in my call step after my 3rd email. I'm going to be spending a lot of time trying to reach out to people that may have not even seen my emails at all. That's going to waste a lot of my time, and it may even discourage me from wanting to make future calls and continue my prospecting because I'm not getting the kind of interaction that I'm looking for. Instead, what I recommend doing is while these emails are going out, maybe after the 2nd email has been sent, you come back to your people page here, and then you sort these columns based on the view metric. And this is going to give you all of the people that have come back to your messages multiple times. Then you can kind of look at the opens to views ratio. Opens are going to be unique per the number of steps that you have in your sequence, whereas views is the total number of times they've actually interacted. And for example, if I've sent one email, they've opened it once, but they viewed it 3 different times, I'd take that as a pretty good indication that there's something that they like there, but maybe not enough to guarantee that they wanted to book a call. I will then look at this, make that phone call, leave them a voicemail, and hopefully that will be enough to kind of convince them that I'm for real, I'm in this, and I'm invested, and I'm willing to put in the work to get them to convert. I find that a much better strategy than just kind of sitting there and making tens of calls per day with little to no real value. And you can do that multiple times. Always view count is a superb item to keep on top of your different contacts engagement. Another thing that I like to do in the add filter section, I'll run last touch less than 7 days ago and view count more than, and we'll use 3 as the example again here. And what that will do is I can save that and I can pull it up from my more drop down menu whenever I need to. And it'll give me a live record of all of my contacts that have viewed a certain number of times within the past week. So every Friday, I'll go through the list, find my high priority targets, and then reach out to those maybe on LinkedIn, whatever way that I think is necessary to get them to convert. And again, you do, if anybody wants to kind of screenshot that or just save it, change the name to whatever you'd like, hit the save icon, and then it'll be available for you in the drop-down menu whenever you need it. Coming back to the steps here, when we get to the 4th step, I've introduced a new subject line here. This is where I want to re-engage. I'm not going to reintroduce myself like I did in the very first step, but I do want to essentially come at this from a new perspective. I want to give new examples. Again, I'm leaning into the how, but I'm giving new examples, new information, new value to continue this conversation. If you are segmenting based on use case, like I mentioned early on, this may not be entirely necessary, but if you're using one generalized sequence, you want to try to hit on as many fronts as possible. So offering different examples is more likely to hit on multiple use cases. So you're going to get more people invested in what you're talking about. And you also want to talk about as many different value propositions as you can. You may not want to spend pages writing about a specific value prop in one of your steps. It's going to be too long. You don't want to write them a novel. So you want to divvy that up and include it in different steps along your thread versus all in one. So your fourth email, re-engage with a new subject line, similar styling to what you want with your first step, but just kind of try to offer in different pieces of information here in a similar vein as to steps 2 and 3. Before I hit the final step, we can talk a little bit about the general cadence of the sequence. I think the profile view and the first step make sense. You want them to be on the same day or around the same day, just so that you're capitalizing on the momentum you're gaining from them realizing that this is a manual interaction. The first 3 emails are going to be within about a week and a half of each other. That way, I'm not being too pushy. I'm not sending them too frequently where they're going to get upset with me and immediately block me or mark me as spam. But I'm also not waiting too long for them to forget about me. I find that to be generally the sweet spot here. Then I'll wait about a week between my third step and the re-engage. Again, just to let things cool, maybe have some incoming responses trickle in. A week, about a week is a good enough time. Again, you don't want to be too pushy. If I respond to my my third step with a brand new thread immediately after kind of capping things off here, I come off as a little bit too pushy, and that can, again, turn people off. For my final step, and you can extend your sequences for as long as you'd like, though I do find there's a little bit of a diminishing return after the fourth step. If you do have multiple use cases still to be discussed, you can create steps in between your fourth and final step. But usually I'll end things off with my Hail Mary or breakup letter. And this is where I'm going to be as tonally unique and personality driven as I possibly can. I have a very clear goal with my first 3 to 4 steps. I am making the sell over the course of these disparate messages. And I'm keeping a conversational style, but I'm still using terminology and clearly looking for something out of you. This one here is going to really be just throwing stuff at the wall to see what works. You want to leave your contact information, but you want to be kind of tongue-in-cheek about it. The example that I'll use is actually breaking up with someone. By the time I get here, if I haven't heard from them, I'll say something along the lines of, hey, I really thought we had something special here. I guess you weren't ready for, and then I'll list a couple of things. I'm always willing to try things again with you. You can reach out to me, find me here. Whatever I can to kind of throw in. I'm clearly joking, I'm a little bit sarcastic, but I want to kind of shake things up. And the idea is to make them realize that I am, in fact, a real person. People have kind of been overwhelmed with the number of automated tools that are out there, so they can tell the signs that this is someone sitting down or not. I want them to kind of look back and reevaluate my previous messages. Oh, this person's real, this person exists. Maybe I'll take a look and reread some of the things that they sent me early on. Another example that I used, a client from a couple of weeks ago, his final message was, it had nothing to do with his sale. He essentially just said, hey, I have a bunch of squirrels living in my attic. What should I do? And then had a little video recording of him walking up to his attic and seeing the squirrels. I don't know how much that worked as far as conversions are concerned, but he did get a lot of responses. And depending on how you pick up from there, you can do a lot with continuing that kind of business relationship. So don't be afraid to get a little wild, get a little wacky, and throw in some humor. In the end, the people reading these are in fact humans. So live a little, it's all right.
Yeah, I'd be really curious to see how that squirrel message resonated with his prospects. But I do love what you're saying about, you know, like you want your prospects or whoever it is that you're emailing to think that you sat down and typed this email just for them. So if it's 5 emails that they got from you, you want them to think that you typed it just for them. I mean, there's so like Josh was saying earlier, a lot of people have started using different automated email platforms. I mean, and I know for me and Josh, probably because we've worked in this industry for as long as we have, I mean, we can pick up on that type of automated email the minute we open it. Okay, like you see the content, you see that it's typical best practices that people have learned over the years, right? So you kind of adding to what Josh has been talking about right now, it's also really important to go back and look at your content and change it up every now and then. So instead of, even if you have a sequence that's been running for about, 6 or 7 months and you're getting good opens and good replies, don't ever be afraid to go back and maybe make some edits and just refresh that content that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. It also goes with long-term deliverability. We are going to have another call on kind of what you can do as far as domain settings and things like that. But re-upping your content is a great way to avoid kind of spam filters and get your sequences out there more and more often. Even running different variants in your existing sequences are good ways to kind of diversify what your messaging looks like. And that's just going to help with whitelisting in the future. One of the last things that I wanted to show here was just the schedule in general. You have to choose days of the week and then windows within those days for the emails to go out. And 9 to 5 can work. Most people will stick with that. But generally, if you do want to optimize, Tuesday through Thursday is going to be your highest interaction dates. And it's obviously going to differ from person to person, but generally speaking, the closer people get to quitting time, the less likely they are to do stuff. So the earlier on in the day you can hit them, the more likely you are to get the responses you're looking for. So starting the day off early is always key. You want to be the first message that they see when they open up their laptops. And typically you want to get around lunch before they're actually going to quit for the day. And Mondays and Fridays, they're not necessarily write-offs, but people are going to be a little bit more lethargic coming off the weekend. And on Fridays, they're excited to leave. So you want to cut things off even earlier than you would normally, just because there's less likelihood that people are going to interact, especially on Fridays. If you send something in the afternoon, they may see it, they may kind of write it off. And then the next 3 days pass, Monday comes along, and they've completely forgotten about what you sent them in the first place. So early mornings, middle of the week, that's the key. And for those of the people that don't know, you can set your schedules to use contact-specific time zones if you have the proper information. In this case, you do need city, state, and country. State is not necessary if they're not in the States, but using those 3 pieces of information will automatically configure their time zones for you. And then as long as you have this toggle turned on, it'll send in whatever specified windows you have, their local time, instead of whatever options you choose up here.
Yeah, and I just wanted to jump in really quickly. And sorry, I had to turn my camera off and mute myself because speaking of squirrels, Josh, there was a squirrel in the tree outside of my front window, and I have a German Shepherd, and I swear it was like he was terrorizing the dog. And so the dog was going nuts. I had to go close the curtains, close the blinds.
He heard.
Yeah. So I think the squirrel's gone now. I don't know, but he wouldn't go anywhere. Yeah. So what I wanted to kind of touch on, Josh had mentioned earlier about using links and attachments, and he did mention that next in 2 weeks we're going to talk specifically about deliverability. But just really quickly, when you are thinking about the content that you're using, if you are going to be using links, try to keep it to 1 to 2 links per email. Mm-hmm. And that is for deliverability reasons. I made a mistake a few years ago. I had 4 links in my emails. I had link tracking turned on. I had really good intentions. I really wanted to send our new customers, some resources to get them up and running. I noticed that my open rate just kind of tanked. It went from 40% to about 5%. And then what I realized is that because I had so many links, people who I was sending to who's using Gmail, the emails were going to the promotions tab. If they had Microsoft as their server, is going to a junk tab. So they weren't even seeing those emails. So keep it to 1 to 2 links is always best. And having a sequence with 4 to 5, even 6 emails, if you have a lot of information that you want to send, you can just spread it out across those emails instead of having them all in one.
Yeah, and to that same point, if you're throwing in multiple links in your first or second step, you're also kind of muddying your call to action. You want to be as focused as possible. So if I have 4 different links in my step 1, as a prospect, as someone reading your message, I have no idea what you want me to do. I'm not going to click on all of them.
Yeah.
In fact, if there are 4 of them, I'm probably not going to click on any of them. So just having one and really honing in on that type of messaging is just going to inflate your numbers. So you, again, just be focused. Don't worry too much about not giving all the information in one shot. You do have the time. That's what these types of platforms are for. And if you don't see someone respond or engage on step 1, you build your follow-up steps to pick up on that engagement. So it's never too late.
Yeah. And, keep in mind too, that most replies tend to come in after the 3rd or 4th email that goes out. So if you create that first step email and you're not getting a lot of replies come in, don't fret, don't think, okay, this is not working. Give it a bit of time. Like Josh was saying when he was going through each step, there could be maybe something in that step 3 email. Maybe you do use a use case, or you're using something where you've shown your ability to maybe increase productivity or whatever the case may be. That could be what your prospect picks up on. That could be that thing that makes them go, hey, you know what? I am going to book a call with this person because now I see X, Y, and Z. So yeah, wait about 3 to 4 steps before you really want to see those replies coming in. And like Josh was saying, use those filters within your sequences. Look to see who's viewing those emails multiple times, and then plan to kind of maybe you are going to re-nurture those prospects later on.
Which is a good point. Another thing that I have here, if I go to settings, okay, and then we go to replies handling. By default, the system is always going to be set to mark person as finished upon reply. And then we have this setting down at the bottom, mark contact as finished after the last step in X number of days. So if they get through all of the email steps, they haven't engaged with you at all, after whatever set amount of time you choose, they will automatically be marked as finished. Once they're marked as finished, they do no longer get tracking on them. So if they do respond after the automatic finish, you'll still get the response in your actual inbox, but you may miss out on it here. Some people have actually just swapped this out to like 999 so that it never marks as finished. And that way, if they do respond much later, you will get a record of that in reply. Likewise, this is also a place where you can edit things if you want to use a different style of sequence. So reply caters not only to sales-centric use cases, but for marketing as well. If you have a monthly or weekly newsletter, you can set this to continue processing steps regardless of the interaction. So you can just set up all of your steps in advance and just have those go out over time. You never really have to worry about unmarking someone as finished, replied, paused, whatever the case is. So you can really kind of make adjustments in your replies handling here.
So we have a question. Oh, sorry, Josh.
Yeah. No, I can mention it after. Let's do the
Okay.
question.
So we have a question. What do your calls to action look like? Do you change them on every step? Do you leave them out of some steps? So I think this really depends on the content that you're using in a step. So for example, if you're using Josh's recommendations, so maybe that first step email, you're asking them, 2 to 3 questions. Maybe it's about their business. Maybe it's about some hurdles they faced. In that, to me, those questions would kind of be that call to action. Like those questions are what you're trying to use to elicit a response for them and get a dialogue going. Maybe on future steps in the campaign, maybe that's when I would say, if you'd like to, hop on a quick 10-minute call to discuss further or whatever the case may be. But yeah, I think it really just depends on the information you're putting in that step and how you're creating that step. I think having maybe a step 1 where you're asking them 2 to 3 questions about their business and then they just see like a calendar link at the bottom of the email, I think it kind of comes across as a bit disingenuous. So Josh, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, very similar. Your first step, you're really not trying to push too hard for the actual sale. unless your list is super focused and you have just, you know exactly who you need to reach out to, they are interested right now, then you can kind of go for the throat. But in more general cold cases, you want to take your time. And the first step should be about just trying to motivate discussion. You don't really want to go directly for the sale. Step two is where you can start including those messages about hopping on the phone call. But it can be as simple as that. Just like, hey, here's all of this stuff. This is how I've helped previous clients. I'd love to have a chat. Here's my calendar link. And then just embed that link or meeting link at the very bottom, and people will interact. It doesn't need to be anything extravagant. The words can be very casual, very conversational. But I do believe in inputting your contact info from step 2 beyond.
And don't get me wrong, I do love calendar links.
Yeah.
You know, I just think there's a right time and a place for them. You know, I love them, just the convenience of them. You don't have to go back and forth with someone to schedule a time. But yeah, I would definitely kind of depends on the information that you have in those steps.
Yeah, I'll have my signature house my calendar link. So when I want to draw attention to it through my call to action, it's always going to be there. But then I can just say, hey, book a call here. Whereas if I don't want to draw attention to it, I can focus on all of my questions, all of my kind of use cases, and then it's there kind of as an aside, and it looks more genuine because it's just part of the signature that's always kind of there. So it's about implementation. The other thing that I wanted to mention, and if you guys do have more questions, maybe you would do things differently and you want to know how I would implement them, by all means, throw it in the chat and we can discuss. But one of the other things that I wanted to mention here, specifically for the LinkedIn and the calls, by default, everything is set to manual. And what that means is if someone gets to that particular stage in a sequence, a task gets created for them. And then you have to go to the tasks, whether it be up at the top here or in your Chrome extensions to free download. And then you have to go through that task and mark it as completed yourself. If you don't do that, they will stick on that task forever. They will not be processed down the line. So by going in your settings, changing that to automatic ensures that your email steps will still go out according to the cadence that you've selected. And the tasks will still be there for you. They'll just be marked as overdue and work as reminders more than anything else.
So we do have another question.
Absolutely.
Yeah, all right. So Majid, I think I unmuted you if you want to go ahead.
Putting you on the spot.
Hey, hi, thanks for that. I was just wondering, like when it comes to the all the research about the lead generation and stuff, after this sequence, what is something when it comes to the open rates for an ideal sequence? What would that be?
Yes, so let me hop back into my sequences for a moment. In general, if it's very cold, and again, not super segmented, your open rate will optimally be around the 30% range. Obviously, the higher, the better. But for most cold cases, generalized, you're looking at around 30%. And the reply rate on that will be around 5%. If you're lower than that, there's some work that can be done. But the one thing to remember about reply is that you're not set in stone. So you can make adjustments as you see interactions incoming here. Let me share the screen again. So yeah, you're looking for a general 30% open rate and then roughly 5 to 8% replies. And yeah, one thing that I also like to mention here is if people are responding to you and saying thanks, but no thanks, do keep in mind that they are responding to you. That is infinitely better than getting straight up ignored. And you can take those negative responses, tweak your content, and then eventually turn those into yeses. You can also respond to people that say thanks, but no thanks. And then maybe your response will make them realize that, again, you are a real person, and you can kind of take it from there. So do not be discouraged by getting a bunch of initial responses and they're all no's. You can take that as positive information and then make adjustments moving forward. The worst thing is if nobody responds at all and everything is just going into the void. That's what you want to avoid the most. We're getting a bunch of stuff here.
Yeah, I can hop into them.
Absolutely.
Okay, so first question, how can we avoid emails going to spam or junk?
So that's quite a an in-depth question. And again, we are going to be having a full deliverability seminar later on, but generally you want to keep the messaging as clean as possible. And when I say clean, I'm referring to the number of links, attachments, images, things like that. We mentioned it briefly, but we generally want to keep it to one HTML-based factor per step. And that should be enough to keep you out of any issues. You also want to take into consideration how many emails you're sending on a daily basis. If your email is brand new and you're using a platform like Reply for the first time, you don't want to send hundreds of emails at the gate. That'll immediately get you marked as spam. So the typical recommendation there is starting around 50 or lower. 50 is probably the highest I would recommend ever going for a brand new email. And then making incremental adjustments over time, maybe increasing it by 5 to 10 every time that you hit your max, until you get to the number that you're most comfortable with.
And we do have another question. I'm just going to kind of skip to this question just because it's related to what we're talking about right now. So this is from Natalia. What do you think about adding video, photo content to the sequence? So I am not a fan of video or photo content in sequences, again, because it really falls back to deliverability. So in addition to having multiple links in the emails that you're sending, having photos or videos could affect your deliverability. It could result in maybe you potentially getting red flagged as spam. So that's on an email and a domain level. In my email signature, I have a very small company logo. That's fine. But for the most part, I'm not a huge fan of video and photo content, purely for deliverability.
Yeah, it's going to really depend on your use case. I also find it super weird that the add video like definition is in the middle of the screen when I hover over it. That's so bizarre. But yeah, it's going to be based on your context and your use case, right? If you're using a very kind of if your product or service is very kind of visual focused and you can't really convey all of the information through text, video is a good place to go, though your messaging is going to look more automated, salesy, markety because of that implementation. If you're going to use it, just don't do it on your first step. Again, it's going to be a huge shot to deliverability. The later on in the same thread that you go, the better off you'll be. Plus you have a little bit more time to kind of ease them into clicking into that. So it definitely can work. I've seen people do it to great effect. It just depends on kind of what your particular product or service has to offer and whether it's going to benefit you to convey its true purpose, or if you could do that just as easily through text. So
we have another question. What is the best way to move contacts into different sequences based on response or lack thereof? So a few minutes ago, Josh had briefly talked about going onto the people page within a sequence and really looking into, for example, who is viewing your emails multiple times. And he did create that filter. So for example, you can create a filter and, if you want to say, okay, I want to pull a list of all the contacts who have, viewed the emails more than, for the sake of Josh's example, 3 times, but who haven't replied, you can create that filter. Once that filter is created, you can select all the people in the list and you will notice a move to sequence icon on that filter page. So Josh is just going to do that now. And then anytime
it's
you're
not
using,
going to show up when if I actually were to save it, but
because there's
let's
nobody,
pretend,
yeah.
let's pretend that we actually pulled it up.
So then you can select everyone and just move them directly. Maybe it's to that re-nurturing sequence that you want to send to. And so, you know, in this situation, if you have people who have viewed those emails multiple times, but they're not replying, then re-nurturing sequence, you're going to want to focus on changing the content. If you create a filter where you're looking for anyone who hasn't opened the email, you can maybe move them to a re-nurturing sequence, but maybe you're going to start to think about, you know, changing out those subject lines and creating subject lines that might entice them to open it a bit more. The other way that you can easily do this, and this is what Josh is pulling up right now, is to create a trigger. So this is essentially the same thing as creating those filters, but it's really going to automate that process for you. So for example, let's say new trigger, maybe someone opened the email. Let's go sequence open email. And then under those conditions, that's when you can really specify what you're looking for. So number of views, we can easily set that to more than 3 or 3, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, and you can even tie it to specific sequences as well.
Yep, so you can say, you know, I want the people in this specific sequence who have viewed it more than 3 times. And then the action that you can create will be to move them to that re-nurturing sequence that you've created. So it's essentially what we went through with those filters, is just automating that process for you.
Yeah, and there's a lot of flexibility that comes along with these different conditions. And you can create as many triggers as you'd like. So if you do want to take the more manual approach, which I personally appreciate just because it allows me to spend a little bit more time with my contact lists, understand who specifically is engaging at certain degrees and at certain points, and then moving them based on my own preferences. Whereas the automated versions, while the end result will be the same, you may be missing out on a lot of the key interactions if you were to actually look on a day-to-day basis. Once they're moved from one sequence to another, you don't get that snapshot of interaction like you would on the people page. You would have to click into the individual and look at their history to see how they've interacted. You'll even get timestamps for when people are interacting on certain days. So if you do really appreciate kind of these snapshots and the integrity of these numbers, manually moving people around is a better option. If you're automatically triggering people to move, some of these numbers may not make as much sense afterwards. For instance, like if I were to move 5 of the 9 people here, the open rates and the reply rates would remain the same, but it would be a little bit confusing at first glance because there's not enough people remaining in the sequence to have actually responded there. So unless I'm actively looking at this, you may confuse yourself with the triggers. So one thing to remember if you do use that over the manual filter options.
All right. So we have another question. Is there anything on the roadmap to be able to respond to your previous emails, like a bump email, for example? We actually had a call today with our product team. I'm just kind of talking about the Q2 roadmap. There's nothing on the Q2 roadmap as of for now. I'm not sure what Q3 and Q4 looks like. So I would suggest, so in your account under the more dropdown, I'm pretty sure that there is a what's new option. So anytime that there's an update, anytime that we've released something new, it will show up there. And as usual with any of our new features, you know, our marketing team will send out updates and things like that. I believe that this is something that we have talked about in the past. I just know that it's not on the Q2 roadmap right now.
Yes. And all of these steps will only trigger if they don't respond. You can continue adding new steps at any point. So if you do want to implement bump emails, you can later on. We've also newly implemented the ability to track one-off messages. So if I do click on the contact profile and send them a one-off, I will be able to see all of those metrics and all of those different threads in this column here. So it may not be the best solution. It's not automated, but you will be able to still see if people are interacting to your bumps. And just to kind of show what I was referencing before, if you do hover over any of these interactions, every time someone views, opens, whatever the case is, you will be able to hover over the timestamps and see exactly when that kind of action took place. And you can make adjustments to your schedules, move people around, do whatever you need to do based on this information. And a lot of people don't realize you can actually do that. So that is a good...
it's hidden. This.
Yeah. It's a surprising number of people don't realize you can do that. It does look like this just means this sidebar opened up. So maybe we need to rethink that.
Yeah. So we have about 9 minutes left, or 8 minutes left. We don't have any more questions right now. Josh, was there anything else that you wanted to add before we wrap up today?
I think just again, to reiterate the idea of being conversational in the words that you use. There's no need to be overly kind of flowery in the language, especially if you're using very general sequences, general lists. You want to make sure that everyone can understand what you're talking about. If you're reaching out to a very technical crowd, by all means, do whatever you want. But you want to write in a way that you would speak to someone in person. And that way it's going to be that much easier for them to respond in kind. I don't know about you, but if someone were to send me a message and it was very technical, my first instinct is to respond to them in a similar style. And if I don't naturally speak that way or write that way, and I find it difficult to kind of jot everything down, I may just give up partway through and not engage at all. So keeping it conversational is just an easy way to make your prospects feel a little bit more comfortable and promote engagement that way.
Perfect. All right. Well, if there are no other questions, we'll give you guys back 7 minutes of your day. Thanks for joining us. Like Josh said, we are going to be having another session in 2 weeks. We're going to be diving into deliverability, which is one of my favorite topics.
Absolutely.
And I mean that. I'm being really honest about that. I love talking about it. So tomorrow we will send out the recording to everyone who was attending today. So you should get that in your inbox tomorrow. And then in the meantime, if you guys have any questions, you can reach out to Josh or myself, or you can always reach out to our support team via live chat. It's a little green icon in the right-hand corner of your screen. The response time is usually under 5 minutes. So yeah, always here to help you guys out.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for showing up and hanging out with us today. And we hope to see you again in the future. And any questions are always welcome.
Bye, guys.
All right, you guys. Bye.